In this lesson, we're going to talk about syllables and stress, Schwa, and Dagesh. I teach all of these things together because they're all related. They're all interdependent. Before we begin, I must remind you that you need to know the Hebrew letters and the vowels before continuing. This lesson will start with Dagesh. Remember, Dagesh is a dot in the middle of a letter. There are actually two kinds of Dagesh. A weak Dagesh does nothing more than change the pronunciation of a letter. A strong Dagesh grammatically doubles a letter. All right, a weak Dagesh can only show up in 6 Hebrew letters. It only affects the pronunciation of that letter, and in order to figure out whether a Dagesh is weak, you simply need to look to see if there is a preceding vowel sound. If there's no preceding vowel sound, then that Dagesh is a weak Dagesh. These are the 6 letters that Begad Kifat, the acronym Begad Kifat helps us remember these 6 letters. These are the ones that can take a weak Dagesh. Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Kaf, Pe, Tav. Be, G, De, Ke, Pe, Te. This is where we get Begad Kefat. Some people say Begad Kefet. Either one doesn't matter. With a weak Dagesh in these 6 letters, they will have a stronger or harder, or linguistically it's called a plosive sound. B, G, D, K, P, T. You can actually feel the breath exploding out of your mouth as you pronounce these letters. Without a weak Dagesh, the pronunciation is softened or linguistically spirantized, which means you don't block the air coming out of your mouth in order to pronounce it, as you did with the earlier ones, B, G, D, K, P, T. So a bet would be pronounced vet. Same letter, it's just that you don't block the air off in order to pronounce this softened sound. Kaf, I'm skipping these for a second. Kaf, if you don't completely block off the air, becomes chaf. So it gets that ch sound, like a gravelly sound. Pei, if you don't seal off your lips, becomes pfei, approximated by the F sound. Pei and Fei. Now, the 3 letters that I haven't done, Gimel, Dalet, and Tav, and in fact I've grayed out their pronunciation down here, well, I've done that because in modern Hebrew pronunciation, there are no longer 2 sounds for each of these letters. Gimel is always G, even if there's no Dagesh in it. Dalet is always D, even with no weak Dagesh in it. Tav is always T, even with no weak Dagesh in it. Now, historically, these did have a second pronunciation. Gimel, without a Dagesh, would be Gimel. Dalet, without a Dagesh, would be Dalet. And Tav, without a Dagesh, would be Thav. Maybe you've heard of people pronouncing this as Sav. I think the Ashkenazi pronunciation still preserves it as Sav, because a lot of people in Europe can't pronounce th, they pronounce it as sa. Maybe this is where Sav came from. Anyway, in Israel, Gimel, Dalet, and Tav always have the same pronunciation with or without the weak Dagesh. Kind of frustrating, but kind of easier too. Here are some examples, some words that have begad kefat letters in them. Some of them have a weak dagesh, and some of them do not. This first word is Baghdad. It's Baghdad in modern pronunciation, but it's the city of Baghdad. I chose this because it's composed entirely of begad kefat letters. You can see that the first letter has a weak dagesh in it. How do we know it's weak? Well, because there's no preceding vowel sound. It's the beginning of the word. There is no vowel coming before it. So it gets a dot in it that affects the pronunciation of that letter. This gimel does have a preceding vowel, this ah sound under the bet, so it will not get a weak dagesh. Remember, weak dagesh only shows up if there's no preceding vowel sound. The symbol under the gimel is called Schwa. We'll get into that shortly, but for now we'll just look at this as the end of a syllable. So this does not have a vowel sound. Because there's no vowel sound before this dalet, it will get a weak dagesh. In the next word, we have the same pattern. We have a pei at the beginning of the word, no preceding vowel, so it gets a weak dagesh. The tav does have a preceding vowel, so it gets no dagesh. And the gimel gets a weak dagesh because it has that zero vowel sound end of the syllable marker, schwa. And likewise here. So these would be pronounced Baghdad, Pitgam, Tigber. All right, now let's jump over to this other dagesh, a strong dagesh that grammatically doubles a letter. A strong dagesh can occur in almost any letter. I say almost because it won't show up in guttural letters, but it can occur in any other letter. As I said, it marks the grammatical doubling of a letter. And the way that we can identify a strong dagesh is that a vowel sound will precede it. So it's the opposite of the weak dagesh. A vowel sound will precede it. Here are some examples. Higid. This gimel is a begad kefat letter. It could have a weak dagesh, but since we see a vowel sound preceding it, we know it is strong. This gimel is grammatically doubled. The next example is siper. This also has a begad kefat letter, but we know this dagesh is strong because of the preceding vowel under the samech. Kibel is the same. We have a bet that could take a weak dagesh, but since it has a vowel sound preceding it, we know it is strong, and therefore this bet is grammatically doubled. In the remaining examples, we have letters that are not begad kefat. Here we have a consonantal vav that is grammatically doubled because of the strong dagesh in it. We know it's strong because of the preceding vowel. This is pronounced tziva. The next example has a grammatically doubled yod. It has a vowel preceding it, so there are two yods right here in this red letter. Chayim, chayim. And the last example has a sheen that's grammatically doubled. We know that it's grammatically doubled because it has a dagesh in it, and it's not a begad kefat letter, so it can't be a weak dagesh. But just to make sure, we can always look over and see that there is a preceding vowel, so we definitely know it's a strong dagesh. Isha is how it's pronounced. The next thing we're going to look at, now that we've got Dagesh and strong Dagesh and weak Dagesh under our belts, is syllables. Remember clapping out words in grade school? These are syllables. They are the units of a word. Over here I've got the Hebrew word for syllables, and I'm using a green line to split it up into its 3 syllables. You can see that this tzadi has a strong dagesh in it. It has a preceding vowel, so that means it's grammatically doubled, and I am splitting these 2 tzadis so that one is in the first syllable and one is in the second syllable. I would read this as hatzlilim, hatzlilim, 3 syllables. Okay, so in Hebrew you can only have 2 kinds of syllables. You can have syllables that are called open syllables, and you can have syllables called closed syllables. There is no other option. It has to be one or the other. Open syllables are going to be a consonant plus a vowel, and that's it. Some English examples of an open syllable might be go, be, hi, do, pa. We have a consonant and a vowel, and that's it. It's an open syllable. Closed syllables, on the other hand, are closed by a consonant. They will consist of a consonant, a vowel, and a closing consonant. Some English examples would be mom, ton, red, bat, or feed. They start with a consonant, there's a vowel sound in the middle, and they close with a consonant. So these are closed syllables. Okay, so now that we know the difference between open and closed syllables, let's look at some examples. Over here on the left, we have words that have only open syllables in them. And on the right, we have words that have only closed syllables in them. Again, I'll apply these green lines to help you see where the syllable division is. We can start with the open syllables right here. We have the word sa. Both of these are open. Sa. There's a consonant and a vowel. Here, the vowel is this symbol underneath the scene and the hey. They work together to make a single vowel sound. The hey is not a consonant here. Sa. Here we have kone. Again, these consonant vav and hey letters are representing vowel sounds. They are not consonants. So this would be kone, 2 open syllables. Here we have another, shiru, shiru. Both the yod and the vav are what's called mater lectionis letters. They represent a vowel sound. In this last word, we have anu, anu. On the right, we have the examples of closed syllables. These words all have closed syllables in them. Hirgish, hirgish. The next one is nechmad, nechmad. The last one is malach, malach. Remember, we talked about how begad kefat letters can have a dagesh in them. This has a schwa in it, not a dagesh. So it has that spirantized, gravelly ch sound. And the schwa is letting you know that it's the end of a syllable. In fact, it's the end of the word. Okay, so all of these are closed syllables. All of these are open syllables. We can now move on to this schwa that we were talking about earlier. The schwa looks like two stacked dots under a letter. Unsurprisingly, there are two versions of schwa. One is vocal. It actually makes a sound even though it's very, very small, it does still make a sound. And then there's another silent schwa. We saw the silent schwa earlier. Remember, the silent schwa is the one that shows up at the end of a syllable. It has no pronunciation, and in fact, the only reason it's there is to show you where the end of the syllable is. It closes a syllable. We saw some examples earlier, but we can look at some more. Here we have each of these red letters with a silent schwa under it, which marks the end of the syllable. So, nichnas, two syllables, nichnas. The next word is anachnu, anachnu. The chet marks the end of the syllable. And the last example has a schwa at the end of the word, halach. We have here an open syllable, ha, and here we have a closed syllable, lach, halach. So the other kind of schwa, it has lots of names actually, vocal or mobile or moving. In Hebrew it's called schwa na. I sometimes call it audible. We'll call it vocal in this presentation. A vocal schwa shows up at the beginning of a syllable. And it does have a very brief pronunciation. Some example words that have this sound might be ellipse, that beginning sound in ellipse, or elucidate. The vocal schwa, for those of you who would be interested to know this, a vocal schwa is usually a reduction from some full vowel. I'll show you an example. On the bottom here we have, I'm going to start with this word on the bottom left. The word here is yashavu. The syllable division is right here between the yod and the shin. Here, let me fill in the syllable divisions. Yashavu. This schwa right here comes from an original short vowel right here. We see it in another verbal form, yashav. We see that vowel, but when we add this suffix to another of the verb's forms, it reduces. Instead of yashavu, it becomes yashavu. Up here we have two other examples of vocal schwa. Here we have a zayin with a vocal schwa because it shows up at the beginning of the word. Remember that a vocal schwa starts a syllable. It shows up at the beginning of a syllable. Well, if zayin is showing up at the beginning of the word, then it definitely has to be starting the syllable. So it will be audible. This would be zman. Very, very short sound for that. Zaman. In modern pronunciation, there's almost no value given to an audible or a vocal schwa, but historically, yes, there should be. It should be zaman. And over here we have one last example of an audible or vocal schwa in the word otcha. Otcha. Now, how come the syllable division couldn't go after the tav, and this could be a silent schwa? Well, we can answer that question with this begad kifat letter here. If there were no vowel sound preceding this kaf, it should have a dagesh in it. But since there is no Dagesh in it, it means there is some vowel sound preceding it. So we know that this is an audible, a vocal Schwa. We'll look at another reason why the syllable division has to go here instead of there in just a bit. Let's look at some examples over here. We've already read through these, but now you can see the green line dividing these words into syllables. Nich, nas, anach, nu, ha, lach. All right, before we get too much further, I want to talk about clusters. When I say clusters, I'm talking about consonant clusters. Consonant clusters are, in Hebrew, are two consonants that are treated as one consonant within a syllable. I can give you some examples in English of clusters. Here we have the words pro, or glee, sky, school, from, smile. Here, this word has two of them, traps and lent. We can see underlined here all of these consonant clusters. When we go to divide these words in English into syllables, we don't divide between the consonants. We don't say p-ro or g-lee. It's one syllable, pro, glee, sky, school. This is kind of the same as how it shows up in Hebrew. One other thing about consonant clusters is that one of them invariably has to have a vocal schwa underneath it, a vocal schwa that's reduced from a full vowel. Let's look at some examples. In the top right here, we have the word shnat, shnat. The sheen has a vocal schwa, but it and the noon work together as a cluster, which start the syllable here. This word is only one syllable. It starts the syllable shnat. The next word is nikeva, nikeva. This is an audible schwa, but it works as a cluster with the kuf. In the next example, we have a strong dagesh in that second mem, meaning that there are grammatically two of them. The first one is ending the first syllable, and the second one is starting the next syllable. So I'm going to divide right down the middle of it. That second mem of this doubled mem is what works as a cluster with the final kaf. This would be mimcha, mimcha. In the next word, the resh and the tzadi are the cluster. Yishritzu, yishritzu. These two final examples are a little bit different because the cluster shows up at the end of the word. The first one here is tzachakt, tzachakt, where the kuf and the tav are a cluster. The second example here is vayesht, vayesht. So if I had to say which of these shvas is audible, it would probably have to be the second one, the one that's under the tav. Now, remember that the vocal schwa is reducing from some previous full vowel. So let me show you some words related to the examples that I gave you so that you can see that vowel reduction. In the word shnat, this is actually the construct form of the absolute word shana, which is a year. We see that full vowel under the sheen is what got reduced to the schwa. Now, I can't show you the original vowel under the noon because it doesn't exist in Hebrew, but the root of the word does exist and it has a kamatz there. Maybe this is the kamatz that reduced to a Schwa. Our word here, mimcha, shows up, I believe, one time like this in the Psalms, where we have mimecha. We can see that mem came from some longer full vowel. In yishritzu, we can look to another verbal conjugation, the one that says he will instead of they will, and we see an O vowel attached to the resh, yishrotz. So it's this O vowel that gets reduced to the schwa. The last two examples are a little bit trickier. Here we have tzachakt. What actually happened here is the tav did have a full vowel attached to it, and somewhere along the line before the Bible was written down, that vowel was lost. It was no longer, or I should say it was no longer pronounced. So when it was written in the Bible, it was written simply with an audible schwa, a vocal schwa at the end. Tzachakt actually came from something kind of like this, tzachakti, or tzachakti, or something like that. It had an I sound at the end, and that was lost, so now it just shows up as tzachakt, with a vocal schwa under the tav. The other example is similar, but we can see in the Bible what the original vowel was. Here we have vayesht, but you can find this example in the Bible, yishte, which is the fuller version, and we can see that that vowel is what reduced to the schwa. But everything here in this example box, the two consonants represent consonant clusters. Okay, so now we can talk about vowels. Again, you should know the vowels already, but I'm going to teach them as either long or short. Now, technically there is a third category of vowels, but I'm not going to get to that quite yet. Right now we're just going to look at the long vowels and the short vowels. All right, now long vowels historically were pronounced longer. They literally had a longer duration as they were being pronounced. Usually, those long vowels would show up in open syllables. And when Hebrews started using mater lectionis letters to represent vowel sounds, they would use those mater lectionis letters to represent long vowel sounds. So here we can see the 5 different vowel qualities here. We have, I'm sorry I left the weak Dagesh out of this bet, forgive me. Here we have va, the kamatz he represents a long ah sound. Here we have tsere, which is also a long vowel. Sometimes it will show up with a mater lectionis yod, but not always. Even if it doesn't have that yod, it's still a long vowel. It's going to be pronounced they, kind of like an EY sound in the word they. They. The next long vowel is chirik malay, or chirik yod. Chirik, when it shows up with yod, is a long vowel. When it doesn't show up with a yod, it could actually be a short vowel, so it's important to make that distinction. So this would be pronounced V, or if it had a weak dagesh here, it would be B. The next one is an O sound. This is called cholam, or cholam vav. Vo is a long vowel. And the last long vowel is a U vowel. It's an oo sound. So this would be vu. Now, it gets its own name that's unrelated to any short vowels, or it's called a shurik. And that oo sound in shurik is the sound of the vowel. Now, the short vowels were historically pronounced shorter in duration, and they usually appeared in closed syllables. You won't see a Mater Lectionis letter representing short vowels. Here are the short vowels. The first one is called patach. It's a short sound. Historically, it would have been more like an sound, but in modern pronunciation, it's basically the same as kamatz, just shorter, ah. The next one is segol. This is a sound, like bet, or met, or egg, or something like that. I teach my students to think of the segol as 3 little eggs underneath the letter. The next one is chirik without a mater lectionis. Again, if this is in a closed syllable, this will be a short vowel, a short I sound, like bit or something like that. Now, this looks like a kamatz, but it's not. It's called a kamatz katan. This is a short vowel, whereas kamatz is a long vowel. This will show up in closed and unaccented syllables. It has a short O sound, like toll. And the last one is a short U sound. There are times where this can represent a long vowel sound, but most of the time it's a short vowel sound. U. It's called kibbutz. U. Here we have 4 example words that contain only short vowels. You can see in these examples that all of them are closed syllables, with the possible exception of this one right here. Barzel, hoshlach. You can see this is a closed syllable that's unaccented. So this is actually a kamatz katan, that short O sound. Hoshlach. The next one is nishar. And the last one is yufne. This hey right here is a mater lectionis, so technically the segol hey, this is an open syllable. But we'll talk about that more in a bit. Over here on the left, we have 4 words with long vowels in it, only long vowels. The first one is rivo, and this means his argument or something like that, rivo. The next one is hayu, rokem, ma. Now, I'll stick in the bars to let you know where the syllable division is. You can see which are closed syllables and which ones are the short vowels and closed syllables, and how the long vowels typically show up in open syllables. But there are some exceptions, like I talked about yufne, and you might have noticed this one down here, rokem. So long vowels don't always show up in open syllables. They usually do. We'll talk about that in just a second. The next topic is stress, or accent, or emphasis. What syllable of the word carries the stress? Well, in Hebrew, you only have two options. Either the last syllable will be accented, and that's called ultimate stress, or the second to last syllable will be accented, and that's called penultimate stress. Ultimate stress means that the stress falls on the final syllable, and by and large, this is the most common syllable that's going to get the stress. And in fact, whenever you're in doubt, you might as well just put the stress on the last syllable if you don't know better. The penultimate, it's got the stress on the second to last syllable, like I mentioned, and it is less common. But here in a bit, I'll give you a rule to help you determine where the stress goes in a word. Here we have some examples of ultimate and penultimate stressed words. Let me read through these. This is ele. The accent will be on that first syllable, ele, because it's the penultimate syllable, the second to last one. The next word is tinoket, tinoket, with the stress on no, tinoket. Here we have rochav, rochav. And here we actually have a kamatz katan showing up right there, so we know this is a closed, unaccented syllable. The accent actually will go right here. Vatakom, vatakom. These examples on the left have ultimate or final stress. Nachon, panim, olam, kidashtem. Again, I'll go ahead and insert these green lines to show you where the syllables, the syllable divisions are, and then I'll add this red symbol to show where the accent of the word goes. Ele, tinoket, rochav, vatakom, nachon, panim, olam, kidashtem. All right, it's at this point that I think you are ready to learn the rule of unstressed syllables. In Hebrew, unstressed syllables follow a rule that has two parts to it, or two allowances. Maybe I should say it that way. All unstressed syllables in Hebrew will either be an open syllable containing a long vowel, or it will be a closed syllable containing a short vowel. On the screen, I've given you an example of both of these. We have here nachon. This right here is an open syllable that has a long vowel. Over here we have a word with 3 syllables, and all of them are closed syllables, and all of them have short vowels. Remember, this dalet has a strong dagesh, so it's as if it's doubled. So this would be kidashtem. You can see I split up the dalet right there. Kidashtem. This, of course, is not a Hebrew word. I'm just splitting it up for you to be able to see how this dalet is actually representing 2 dalets. It's grammatically doubled. Okay, so the question then becomes, if this is the rule of unstressed syllables, then what happens if a syllable breaks the rule? I mean, what if you have an open syllable with a short vowel, or a closed syllable with a long vowel? Well, if it doesn't follow the rule of unstressed syllables, then it must be the accented syllable. Let me show you. In this first word, we have panim. In the first syllable, we have an open syllable with a long vowel. That follows the rule. But in the next syllable, we have a closed syllable with a long vowel. That's not allowed according to the rule, so therefore this must be the accented syllable, panim. In this second example, ele, we have a closed syllable, the closed first syllable, with a long tsere vowel. See, the lamed is grammatically doubled, so one lamed is closing the first syllable, the second lamed is starting the second syllable. So we have here a closed syllable with a long vowel. Well, that's not allowed according to the rule of unstressed syllables. Therefore, it must be stressed. It must be accented. Ele. The next word is kind of like the first one we saw. The first syllable it follows the rule. It's an open syllable with a long vowel. But the second syllable is closed with a long kamatz vowel. That's not allowed unless this syllable is accented. Olam. The fourth example here is melech. We know this first syllable will get the accent, it will get the stress, because we have an open syllable with a short segol vowel. Same with this last word. We know that patach is short, and we know that chirik in a closed syllable is short, so both of these are short. This ayin and patach is an open syllable with a short vowel, so it must get the accent. Ayin. In these three examples, we see a long vowel in a closed syllable, so we know that that gets the accent. And in these two examples, we see a short vowel in an open syllable, so we know it must get the accent. Okay, so now that we've talked about Dagesh and syllables and Schwa and stress, we can now look at an example text. This is from the Shema passage in Deuteronomy 6, verse 4 and following. And I'm going to insert the syllable breaks into the text, and I'm also including an accent symbol if the word has penultimate accent. Now you can see of all these words, only 5 of them have penultimate accent. So more often than not, you can expect there to be final stress or final accent, but now you know the rules about what syllable should get the accent, so you should be able to figure this out for the most part. Let's start reading. We have Shema. This is an audible Schwa, and we have here a cluster, Shin Mem cluster. This is one syllable. Shema. We know it's a closed syllable. This ayin closes the syllable. So the cluster opens it, the patach is our vowel, the ayin closes it, one syllable, Shema. The next word, Yisrael. Yisrael. Here we have a closed syllable with a short vowel. That's allowed. So this must be a silent schwa. Yis. Here we have an open syllable with a long vowel. That follows the rule of unaccented syllables. But here at the end, we have a closed syllable with a long vowel. That breaks the rule, so that means this gets the accent. Yisrael. The next word is God's holy name. The vowels that show up in the Bible aren't even the right vowels, so I'm not going to divide this into syllables or pronounce it. Traditionally, we're not supposed to pronounce it. We're just supposed to say a circumlocution, Adonai or Hashem. The next word is Eloheinu. Now, we didn't talk much about the third class of vowels, the so-called reduced vowels. We talked about Schwa being audible, how it's a reduced vowel, but there are actually three more reduced vowels. And these will typically show up when you would expect an audible, a vocal schwa, but it's under a guttural letter. So this is going to be a very short eh sound, and it will act as a cluster with the lamed. Elo, hey, nu. This yod here might be considered consonantal, and if so, then that means we have here a closed syllable with a tsere. Now, some people would disagree and say that tsere yod is actually a long vowel, which means it does follow the rule of unaccented syllables, but in that case, all three syllables follow the rule. So where do you put the accent? Well, anytime you have an enu suffix, it's penultimate. That's something you'll just have to remember. Eloheinu. Here we have Adonai again. Echad. Wait a minute. Why did he put the accent on the second syllable? Isn't this an open syllable with a short vowel? Well, we didn't talk much about this, but I mentioned that Dagesh cannot show up in certain letters. It cannot show up in guttural letters. There should be a Dagesh in this chet to grammatically double it. So one chet is closing the first syllable and one chet is starting the next syllable. But because this guttural chet cannot take a Dagesh, it doesn't show up. Oftentimes, when a guttural rejects a dagesh, it will cause the previous vowel to lengthen, but not always, especially with chet and hey. So here we do actually have a closed syllable ech and a closed syllable chad. Because this long kamatz is in a closed syllable, it must get the accent, echad. These two dots mark the end of the verse. Now we're starting verse 5. Ve'ahavta. This schwa is audible. It's at the beginning of the word. We have a kamatz and an open syllable. It follows the rule of unaccented syllables. The next syllable is closed, hav, with a silent schwa under the bet. And because there's no sound in this schwa, that means the next begad kefat letter gets a weak dagesh, ta. This is an open syllable with a long vowel. So wait, all three of these syllables follow the rule of unaccented syllables. So that means the emphasis could go at the end or in the penultimate syllable. That's true. This particular word, depending on where the stress is, can have two different meanings. If the stress is on the penultimate, it's an action that happened in the past, but if it's on the final syllable, it means it's an action that happens in the future, or an incompleted action. So you can have words that could have more than one accent placement. Okay, it could be here, it could be there. The next word is single syllable, et. You get a long vowel in the closed syllable, it means it's accented. Well, yeah, it's only one syllable, of course it's accented. Then we have Adonai again. Here we have the same word as earlier, Eloheinu, except this time it has a different ending. Elohecha. Elohecha. The first syllable has a cluster with a long vowel in an open syllable. The next one has a segol yod. Some people would call this a long vowel. Some people would say this is a short vowel with a consonantal yod, so this is actually a closed syllable. Either way, it follows the rule of unaccented syllables. And so does the last one. We have an open syllable with a long kamatz vowel. So either one of these could take the accent, except anytime you have echa on the end of a word, it's going to be penultimate. That's another thing you'll have to memorize, just like Eloheinu is penultimate, so also Elohecha will be penultimate. All right, in this next word, I put a green line after the word. I mean, how does that make any sense to have a syllable division after the word? Well, it's because we have this hyphen. It's called a makaf, but makef, but it's like a hyphen. It's connecting this word with the word that follows. So it's like both of these are actually one word. So I'm including a syllable division marker here. So that means the first syllable of this compound word is bechol. Did you notice that was a kamatz katan? It's a closed, unaccented syllable. So that's a short vowel in a closed syllable where the bet and the kaf are a cluster. Bechol. This kaf loses its dagesh, its weak dagesh, because it has a vowel sound preceding it. The next syllable in this compound word will be leva. Again, a cluster, lamed bet, or it's actually vet. It's a bet without a weak dagesh. Leva, open syllable, long vowel, kamatz. V'cha. This is also an audible schwa, and this bet is acting as a cluster with the kaf. This is an open syllable with a long vowel, kamatz. So this would be b'chol levav v'cha. Final stress. Here we get another compound word with that hyphen-looking thing. But this word starts with a long vowel. Because it's a long vowel, the syllable division is actually going to be right there, which we would expect. This schwa is going to then be audible, and the weak dagesh that should go in this bet disappears because of the preceding vowel. Also, the bet and the kaf are acting like a cluster in the next syllable. Again, a kamatz katan. Uvechol. The next syllable is naf. It's closed. There's a short vowel. And the last syllable will be shecha. This is an audible schwa, a vocal schwa. And the sheen and the kaf are a cluster. This is an open syllable with a long kamatz vowel. A lot of people teach schwa by teaching many, many, many rules. My rule is simple. If schwa comes at the end of a syllable, it's silent. If it comes at the beginning of a syllable, it is audible. Some people will teach, if you see two consecutive schwas in a row, the first is silent and the second is audible. Well, yeah, I guess if that helps you, you can remember it. All right, this right here is what we saw earlier. Uvechol, with another hyphen. Me'odecha. The mem and the aleph are acting as a cluster. The cholam is a long vowel in this open syllable. The dalet has a short vowel. in an open syllable. That breaks the rule of unaccented syllables, so therefore it must be accented, and it is. And then cha at the end, we've seen before, open syllable with a long vowel, and that's the end of another verse. All right, the next word is v'hayu, audible schwa, vav he consonant cluster, open syllable, long vowel. The next one is another open syllable with a long shuric vowel. Both of these follow the accent of the rule of unaccented syllables. You'll just have to look at the accent in the text, the cantillation marks to tell where the accent is, or just assume it's the last syllable. Here it is, v'hayu. The next word, hadivarim. Hadivarim. This dalet has a strong dagesh. We can tell because there's a preceding vowel. So there's going to be a dalet closing the first syllable and a dalet opening the next syllable. So the first syllable is closed with a short patach vowel. It follows the rule of unaccented syllables, but this is also pre-patonic, what do they call it? Antepenultimate. So therefore, this can't have the accent anyway. The second dalet in this doubled letter is going to be a cluster with the bet that follows. And this kamatz is showing up in an open syllable, which is allowed in the rule of unaccented syllables. The last syllable, however, is closed with a long vowel. That breaks the rule of unaccented syllables, so we know this must get the accent. Hadvarim. Next is the word ha'ele. We had this example word earlier, except now there's a ha, a definite article attached to it. Here, the ha would typically have a patach and a doubling dagesh in the next letter, but gutturals don't take a dagesh. So instead of doubling this aleph, it compensates by lengthening the vowel under the he. That way you have an open syllable with a long vowel. It follows the rule of unaccented syllables. The next syllable, as we saw earlier, breaks that rule. We have a closed syllable with a long vowel. See that lamed? It's got a strong dagesh, so it's grammatically doubled. It's closing that syllable. Because it breaks the rule of unaccented syllables, it must be accented. And then the final syllable is lamed segol he, which is open, which is allowed. Ha'ele. This next word, asher, is only one syllable. Again, we get a reduced vowel under the aleph that works as a cluster with the sheen. Asher, asher. Here we have an open, or actually all three of these syllables are open syllables with long vowels. When in doubt, put the accent on the last syllable, anochi. Both of these follow the rules of unaccented syllables. The first one is mitzav, with that doubling dagesh in the vav here. And that second vav is going to be a cluster with the kaf at the end. V'cha, mitzav v'cha. The mem and tzadi are a cluster, and the second vav and the kaf are a cluster. Mitzav v'cha. Here we have the word hayom, doubling Dagesh in the Yod, so the first syllable is closed with a short vowel. The second one, however, is closed with a long vowel, so it must get the accent. Hayom. And here we have another makaf, or makef, so we treat this as part of the next word. We have a closed syllable with a short vowel, al. Here we get a vocal schwa. The lamed is going to be a cluster with the bet, leva. The next syllable is open but has a short vowel, so it must get the accent. Ve, cha. Al leva ve cha. Let me read through this at a reduced pace for you to follow along all at one time. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha bechol levavecha ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך.